the thing is that film photography was really the norm for many, many years, many decades, I would say, from really the whole 20th century up until the late or the early 2000s. And, you know, you have something kind of standardized, but a new technology comes along, in this case, digital, and eventually it's going to get replaced. And so the last time I touched anything that was a digital photograph was in 2014. And at that time, I think I've said this before, but at that time, trying to find a vendor that sold film for aerial photography was a pretty tough task. So I'm not sure in terms of current landscape how prevalent or not film or film cameras are. Hence, everything is really moving into this digital, you know, era. Advantages in this case, you know, we have, well, I guess what we have noted here is the disadvantages of using film, right? And again, it's not to say that film is a bad thing, because it's actually very proven in terms of photogrammetric stereo collection. There's like a graininess to it. So I kind of think of it like if you're an aficionado of vinyl and you really like the way records sound because there's just a different pureness to it. It's the same type of thing. It really is. When you talk to a photogrammetrist who's done stereo compilation for years and years, they'll probably swear by film because it's got this different, you know, look and feel to it. At the end of the day, it's the same science, okay? And when we really break things down, film, you have to process it in a dark room with chemicals and space and time, etc. The storage of the film, the rolls of film, they're big, big things that you have to have space for. And you can't exactly just pop a roll of film into a computer and FTP site it or email it to somebody. Yeah, I mean, there's so much more involved with film as opposed to digital. So I know I might be stating some of the obvious things, but this is another reason why. And with drones, it's not even really a question. I don't know any drone that takes or that handles a film camera for that matter. But when traditional photogrammetry in large aircrafts, it's really the way things are going. Okay. So electronic imagery, digital imagery, right? When we say this, we're talking about digital sensors and recording information. So millions, okay, not just thousands, millions of pixels. And each one of those pixels is essentially picking up or scanning a unique part of the Earth as, sorry, I'm moving my screen over, that's why I'm looking over here. Each one of those pixels picking up a unique portion of the Earth, right? A unique portion of the surface. There's a sensor type called a charged coupled device, a CCD. And essentially what this thing does is it records the radiation, okay, electromagnetic radiation, values onto a specific, like the sensor type is light sensitive materials, and it's all embedded on a silicon chip. The author goes into this stuff in greater detail, trust me. And so what happens is we end up with multiple rows and columns of digital arrays. Okay, so like stacked, boom, 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 boom. Like as if you're looking at a big table, right? Each one of those little cells, that's a pixel, right? And yeah, just looking at it from a microscope. So what happens is, okay, when we say linear array, we're talking about the array or the row of pixels like this in a linear line fashion. This is an example from a spot satellite sensor. Let's see, each receptor within the CCD equates to 1 pixel within the image. So the reason I'm showing you this is kind of just a look at it behind the scene kind of thing. I'm not expecting you to necessarily understand all those little bits and pieces of it, but yeah, this is what a sensor is going to look like when you zoom in real close. And what we're seeing here is a difference in pixel size, 10 versus 100 this little mu sign, but this represents a micrometer in size. So 100 micrometers versus 10 micrometers. You know, this all relates to the pixel size, which we've talked about before, but we're going to get into a little bit more in this section. And pixels makes me bring up, you know, a very common terminology called megapixels. And let's understand what that really means, especially in the digital landscape. So megapixels, all right? When we say megapixel, we're talking about the image sensor and its linear arrays. So the image sensor has a fixed number of pixels in the X, let's call it the X, okay, in the horizontal, and a fixed number of pixels in the Y, in the vertical. So for example, sensor might have 4,000 columns. Okay, when we say columns, it's like boom, 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 but that would be this direction. Okay, so 4,000 by 3,000 rows this way, 4,000 by 3,000. And if we just simply multiply those two things together, 4,000 by 3,000, what do you get? Well, you get 12 million. 12 million pixels altogether in the entire sensor. What you end up with is a 12 megapixel, you know, rating of a sensor. So whenever you see that in a commercial camera, X amount of megapixels, that's what they're talking about, okay? The X amount of pixels times the Y amount of pixels. That's all that it is. But yeah, it's in the millions of pixels range. In the early 2000s, when digital photography was coming along, you know, you'd get something in the realm of, you know, if you had a 1 megapixel rating with you know, meaning you had 1 million pixels, it was phenomenal. But I would say, I mean, on a phone, you're looking at, gosh, I don't even know what the latest iPhone's got, but at least 12, like in this example, and sometimes upwards of 20, 24, even more than that. Drone cameras have, megapixels have expanded exponentially over the last couple years, to the point where we were first talking about a few megapixels ratings to now in 2021, there is a camera on the market that has 45 megapixel rating, which is a phenomenal achievement, okay? Just to give you another little tidbit of information that's not part of the book, the cameras that you find on a large aircraft, digital cameras that you find on a large aircraft, I don't think I have any examples, but so for example, I'll tell you a name here. There's a company called Vexcel, V-E-X-C-E-L, and they make a large frame. Okay, when I say large frame, like think of this entire box filled up. But I mean, huge. You're talking a 300 megapixel rated camera, all right? But again, this is for large aircraft, thousands of feet in the air, trying to map, you know, big areas of surface at a time. And that's kind of what it's involved there. Yeah, here's another little tip for you. When you are trying to figure out, you know, how many megapixels is my camera? I don't know. It's just a picture. Well, you could figure that stuff out by going into the properties of the image. And for example, if you go to the details pane tab, you'll find the width and the height. So the width is the X, the height is the Y. And just take those two things, times those together, and there you go. There's your megapixel rating. This is just some random one I found of some random picture I found that I'm using for an example. Focal length. There's a ton of different digital you know, camera, like your aperture and your shutter speed. I mean, you see them right there. If your camera has a GPS, or the drone's camera has GPS, it will also embed the latitude, longitude, altitude into this metadata. There's your focal length, right? And we learned about focal length and how important that is, because focal length determines, or is, you know, kind of one of the parts of the formula for determining how high or what kind of sample distance is going to be resolved, right? And you can find that right there in this example at 3 millimeters. This is probably some person's phone camera. I'm not sure. Okay, and so yeah, sensor size and megapixels, they are there is a relationship between the two, but they're not necessarily the same thing. And I want to make note of that because it's important. Now, the thing is, with megapixels, we could talk about millions and millions of pixels and how great it sounds. But the fact of the matter is, higher megapixels don't necessarily mean higher quality imagery. So the reason being, if you have a very small sensor, like I have one of the smallest phones on Earth, and everybody tells me that. So I know this is retro 10 years ago, but I love it for the size. In fact, what I'm trying to get to here, look at how small this camera is. Even if this camera is a 12 megapixel rating, it could be, it could have the same megapixel rating as like this point and shoot camera, right? Look at the difference between these two things. Now, the sensors on these two is going to be quite different, where this one is going to have a very small physical size sensor. This one's going to have a much larger in comparison. But for all intents and purposes, they actually do have the same megapixel. Yeah, this one's 12 megapixels. They do have the same megapixel output. The difference between the two, with this being a larger sensor size, the image quality is going to be much better because what happens is with imagery you're talking about, and with photography, right? These are kind of photography basics now. You're talking about how light is registered with this sensor that we, this light, the thing we talked about a few slides ago. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the more light that can essentially be registered or not, the better the output is going to be. I mean, physically, it's going to look like a cleaner, crisper output. So when you have a larger frame, you end up having larger pixel sizes, even if the megapixel is the same. You can have the smallest camera ever and have a high megapixels. It just means that the individual pixel sizes on that camera are very small, meaning that they do not have a very high dynamic range. Dynamic meaning that there's a wide spectrum, right, of how much light can be ingested there. So this is what I'm trying to get to. And, essentially, if it's one versus the other, a larger sensor is going to be a better, larger sensor versus higher megapixel. A larger sensor is going to yield better results compared to a smaller sensor with the same or even higher megapixels. Now, if you can get both, I mean, great, right? That's the idea. So that's the conclusion. Larger sensors, always going to be better. This is kind of giving an overview of what your 12 megapixel, generally what your 12 megapixel sensors on like a phone will look like, something like this size, okay? And just think about the surface area that you have to cover with something like this, even compared to a 1-inch sensor, or over here, 36 by 24, which was considered full frame. Now, if you have a full frame, you're talking big DSLR, professional photography. There's a reason that thing is so heavy, because the sensor inside is so big and heavy. Okay, let's move on. Okay, pixels. There's a lot of talk about this. So pixels, let's break this down. Pixels means, when you say pixel, it means picture element. Pixel, that's a pixel. A pixel, a minute area of illumination on a display screen, of many from which the image is composed. Wow. So basically what we're saying is, we've already kind of described this, right? So it's a part of the, so we know that the sensor has these pixels, how they're broken down into these linear arrays, and how that's broken down as we saw earlier. The pixel is the correlation between that versus when it turns into an actual image, okay? So as we zoom in on an image, every one of those little squares, that's a pixel. That's a pixel. Let's bring all these out here. So the smallest area that can be separated or recorded as an entity on an image, right? So that's what I mean. When you zoom in and you can see that little tiny square, that's a pixel. So that's the smallest thing that can be resolved. And pixels possess something called, and we could say this in either way, a digital number / brightness value, BV, okay? Does the same thing. right? And I'll get more into those as we get through this. But just remember that right now, that every pixel that shows up in an image has a digital number or /BV associated with it. Now, pixel spacing, i.e. size, okay, it's going to vary with the sensor. And we learned this before, okay? The sensor X here, okay, times how many, or divided by how many X numbers exist. So what we're saying is how many columns exist. That, okay, so how big is the physical size, like what this one was? Like if we use one of these examples, the first example there, if it was 1 inch, we're talking 12.8 times, or divided by the number. So maybe by 4,000, and that would give us, boom, pixel size, okay, pixel size. Which all comes back to, what were we talking about? All these things. Yeah, I'm not gonna repeat myself here. Okay, so we learned this a little bit, ground sampling distance already, and then it's gonna come up a lot more, especially in this lab. GSD, we call that, that's a frequent way to call it, GSD. Now the author is going to refer to this as a ground resolve distance, and that's fine, GRD. It's the same thing. The GSD, it pertains to the size, the smallest feature that can be resolved. Essentially, what we're talking about with GSD is the GSD is the relationship between what's in the actual scene in the photographed. So like, for example, whatever the features are and how resolved those features are. And in particular, the size. So like if I had my screen and I was measuring the little square, if I zoomed in all the way and I measured the square on one side and it said, you know, I'm using GIS and it said, this thing is 1 inch by, 1 inch across. So as I zoom out, I go, oh, that 1 inch represents a trash can. So what it's trying to say is your GSD is a 1 inch, okay? And another way to refer to this would be a pixel size. There's a lot of pixel and sampling and distance and all. A lot of it can get intermingled, all right? I'm trying to do my best to separate these things, and you really want to compartmentalize the differences, even though there's a lot of repeated terminology and they kind of mix together. Your pixel size, it's different than, well, pixel spacing. Maybe we shouldn't use these things in the same way or the same. Let me just make a point here. This slide, when it says pixel size, is referring to, I'm gonna actually remove this, because this is just confusing. There you go. Okay, all in one take. So this pixel spacing is different than your pixel size in this context. Okay, when I say pixel size here, oh geez, we have it again. Boy, I should really review these ahead of time. I guess I know I do, right? But sometimes things get slipped past there. Anyways, let's just refer to pixel size and call that ground sampling distance. Same difference, okay? Now, pixel size, as it's being, your pixel size is one of the final, like if, let's say we're processing imagery and we're processing a mosaic of imagery, in particular like an orthomosaic, which you're gonna do in the lab. Your pixel size is one of the things that you can actually manually set. Now there's a kind of averaged out version of what that's going to be based on what the computer's photogrammetry spit back out at you. But say, for example, you wanted to resample that, and instead of it being, let's say, ×1 or a 1 by 1, you could make it a 2 by 2 or a 5 by 5 or something like that, okay? There's another example of subsampling it to a smaller number size, but I don't recommend doing that. I really don't, because you're not actually resolving anything more by doing so. It's just adding disadvantages, in my opinion. Let's move on. Okay, we've seen these kind of things already. Here's your pixel size / spatial resolution / GSD. All here in one place. So let's say you have a 30 meter. Now what we're looking at here is the reality and the pixel size here versus what's actually there, and then how that will correlate in the raster. And in this case, if it's 30 by 30 and the blue house is like the majority of what's in the pixel, well, then the pixel is going to be just kind of a big blue blob. All right. Now, if we had something that was much finer, down to 6 times less, 5 meters in size, what you have is something like this. And then if we took it even further, 5 times smaller, down to 1 meter, you're going to get a pretty good representation. So the moral of the story is the finer the pixel size, i.e. the smaller this number is, the more resolution you're going to resolve. Okay, or the better the resolution, the better the picture is going to resolve, the higher the resolution is going to be. All right. Let's move on and talk about something a little bit different now. Some of this is review. I mean, I know that we've covered these topics briefly, but it's all supposed to come full circle here. So spectral sensitivity, this is referring to the, there were the 4 types in the beginning, right? Spectral, radiometry, temporal, etc., right? Types of resolution, and spatial. Now, this is in relation to spectral resolution. And so what we're talking about is, you know, we talked about this before, the band window. I think that's what I referred to it as. Where is what band or what channel is the specific spectral resolution or sensitive, where is it sensitive to that particular spectral range on the spectral radiometric spectrum. So, okay, minimum and maximum wavelengths at 1/2 of its potential maximum value. Let me just show you over here. Okay, so in regards to spectral sensitivity, let's focus here on this thing called full width half max. As we just described, we're looking for the band window, and we've talked about this already. And so what we see here is on the bottom in the x-axis, that's the wavelength in nanometers, the range. And we know that, you know, this curve is our wavelength from here to here to here. So the best potential of where we're going to define the spectral sensitivity is going to be in this thing called the full width half max, where we find the tippy top of the wavelength, okay, here. That's a sampling interval. That would be the maximum. And then we take, as if it were the furthest width apart, what half of that would be. And it's pretty kind of self-explanatory. I'm basically just describing exactly what the picture looks like. But what I'm trying to get across to you guys is that the sampling interval for the best sampling of spectral resolution is going to be in this little range here for this particular wavelength. So all that being said, it's not the entire wavelength that gets counted when a sensor is being calibrated for a specific spectral range and band. So like, for example, I showed you guys those spectral cameras with the little 5, you know, remember the red camera with the little 5 cameras on it? The sensor with the 5 cameras on it. And so each one of those, that sensor has various band windows that are full width half max for blue, red, green, near infrared, red edge, etc. And each one is going to be this smaller portion. So it's not like one goes to one end of the band, you know, blue to blue all the way in the whole wavelength, and then green to green. They're not butted up against each other. There's a little bit of a break between them, okay? And so this is to maximize the spectral sensitivity. Moving on, let's talk about this term called digital numbers. And so your digital number or DN value, or also known as a BV or brightness value, okay? DN and BV are interchangeable. These are the, how do I put this? Your DNs are determined by the bits of the sensor, which is capable of recording. I'll get to that in a second. Essentially what happens is you have a range of colors, okay? And starting at 0, which is black, and then all the way till the very end of the range, which is going to be white, okay? And everywhere in between, whatever that range is going to be, there's numbers, you know, sequentially, and each one of those numbers represents a different, you know, color value. So it's like you're looking at the rainbow, and the dark, if you're looking at a rainbow, okay, and the closer the colors are to black, like a dark blue, the lower in number they're going to be. The lower the DN value is going to be. And the closer to a bright white, like a yellow they are, the higher they're going to be in value. And so this is determined, the range is determined by something we call bits. And so here's an example of an 8-bit image. And this is the most common commercial used type of imagery, 8-bit. So you have 256 brightness values, which means that if you start at 0, which is black, and then you go across the range, 255, not 256, because we count 0, but 255 is going to be the white, okay? So everywhere in between there is some other random color. And so when you look at a picture, what happens is you're going to plot that out, and you're going to have what's called a histogram. And the histogram is going to show you the distribution of how many 35s there are, how many, you know, 122s there are, okay? Something like this. And I'll show you that in a second here. But yeah, continuing on with this, the higher the bits, the much broader the range is. So we went from an 8-bit to a 12-bit, and look at how exponentially larger the amount of BVs there are. So it's not to say that, you know, you get colors that are, well, you know, a rainbow is going to be the rainbow of colors is going to be what it is. It's just now you have a much, you know, instead of one type of blue, there may be 25 different types of blue. Okay, if that makes sense. So this is a richer type of, you know, saturation is what you're going to get from something with more bits. It's also going to be a larger data file, etc. But, you know, very expensive, large sensors that usually go on manned aircrafts could be in this kind of 12-bit range. Usually drones are not like that. They're usually 8-bit sensors. And even 16-bit, you get even, you know, way beyond, okay? So this stuff is out there in remote sensing. It's just a matter of, you know, how advanced and how expensive the sensors are. Can relate to how many bits it can produce. Okay, so let's move on. Let's see. Let me just show you the histogram stuff real quick before we go back to this band stuff, because some of this is review. So again, think about these DN values, and let's talk about image enhancement for a second, okay? So when we want to aesthetically, because imagery is not just scientific, it's also artistic, right? I mean, just to the naked eye or even to the professional eye, when something looks better, you judge it differently. And so aesthetics do matter. And so the appearance of a digital image can be enhanced, okay? You know, arbitrary in a sense of like what I think looks good to me might not look good to you, or etc. But it is still a practice that should be at least understood. And so enhancement, if there's enhancement done, it should be conducted without manipulating any type of the integrity of the original data. So in other words, what I mean is we're going to radiometrically enhance, okay, data, but we're not changing anything or enhancing anything in relation to the spectral resolution or the spectral sensitivity. Okay. Okay. So this is the most common type of enhancement that I'm referring to, stretching the histogram. Okay. Down here, we have two different examples of a histogram. Let's look at the one here on the left side. And what's going on there is, remember those DN values I was talking about? So those would be in the x-axis here. And this is an 8-bit type of image where you have 0 all the way to the left and 255 all the way to the right. I know the numbers are kind of not quite that, but just follow along with me. And so what happens is On the Y, these would be the number of pixels in the image that correspond to that value. So in other words, let's just say 45, number 45, which is like a closer to black kind of color or a darker color. There are 60,000 returns of that, right? 60,000 something pixels have that type of DN value. So look at the image up here though, right? It's very dark and kind of hard to make out exactly what the content is, what the features are. And this could be, you know, because of atmospheric, interference or cloud cover or, you know, whatever it is, okay? So the point I'm trying to make is what can happen is if you stretch these values out, okay, you know, conducting an image enhancement, and you stretch these values across a wider spectrum of DN values. So here we go with this histogram using a stretching type of functionality. Look at what happens, okay? The image all of a sudden pops much brighter, okay? And so it's not just to brighten images, but it's also to make colors really stand out more. And it's funny because you've probably done this kind of thing unknowingly in the past with some picture you might take, and you know, Apple has these features built in, right? There's like the automatic enhancement button, and you click it, and boom, your picture kind of looks a little bit brighter. And so all it's doing is it's manipulating the histogram, and it's stretching out the DN values. Okay. Another type of enhancement is to kind of crop. So like, instead of black being at 0, maybe making black at, you know, 35 and white at 190, so that you have a smaller range. It kind of is the same thing, honestly. It's kind of the same thing. But yeah, I want you to know about this image enhancement technique. It's a very common thing to do, even if you do it unknowingly. But next time you, Apple doesn't have, like I have an iPhone, and Apple doesn't have a histogram built into its kind of standard camera slash photo viewer, as far as I know. But I know that there are programs out there and there are apps out there for pretty cheap that you can download. And if you find an option that says histogram and turn it on, okay, check it out. Turn it on and look at it and look at an image, and then go through some enhancement and watch that histogram correlate. It's going to be a very one-to-one relationship. Okay. Let's go back a couple. These are a little bit out of order. Back up here. I want to just reiterate some things about multi-band combinations. With Landsat, these are some of the most common ones. So the textbook suggests, let's see, 742 is a false color. 321 is a natural color. So we know that, right? 3 is red. It's actually would be, yeah, red, green, blue, like that, RGB at 321, because blue is before red. Let's see. So rather than look at the numbers themselves, kind of scroll back to this, because when you take the quiz, there will be a question like this, and scroll back to these slides. I'm going to try to do a better job of showing you this by looking at these slides. Okay. So first we have just the, you know, the image. These images are what results when we look at just an individual band, you know, what that produces. Okay. So like the blue band produces this grayscale image. The green band produces a gray. So they all just produce a grayscale image. Okay. If you pay attention, there are subtle differences between them. Okay. The thing is, when we composite them, when we composite 3 of them into one, just like we would do if we tried to do an RGB, what you end up getting is something of value that you can discern. Okay. So like, for example, I'll go on order down here. Okay. 321 is your natural color. That's the, you know, here's what the eye sees kind of thing, right? 432, okay, number 4 is a near infrared. So 432 is an enhancement of what happens is you get vegetation to pop differently. When I say pop, I'm saying it shows up brighter and it shows up easier for you to interpret. Okay, so 432 is a popular what's called false color near infrared because it makes the vegetation really stand out. 457 is all infrared band, okay, all infrared. And this is used for minerals and other types of earthwork type of analysis, okay. Also, the vegetation looks orange, so you know it's kind of a to each his own kind of thing. But I think the one that really stands out the most when it comes to vegetation is this 742 combination, because now you have much brighter variations of green. And the brighter the green, the healthier the vegetation. And we're going to learn more about this when we look at vegetation indexes. But yeah, the 742 would be the best option for popping out the vegetation. This is a panchromatic version. I'm not quite sure what PC135 actually means. But then here's a thermal band, which shows emissivity, right, which is temperature. Okay, moving on. Let's shift gears for the next 20 minutes or so, and let's talk about drones next. So this is a topic that it's not in the chapter. So when you get questions about it, just refer back to this lecture, okay, and refer back to these slides. Drones is still a pretty new thing in a geo world. Like, and I mean that like within the last 5 years or so. So there's still a little bit of a lacking of technical documentation and textbooks about it, but I'll do my best to share my knowledge and my experience. Okay. So I use drone as a loose kind of anecdotal or general term. We all know it, you know, at least in the sense of, let me make one thing clear. I'm not talking about drones in military terms, okay? I'm talking about ones that are small that, you know, can be conceived as toys. Maybe were intended to be toys when they were first produced. Maybe they are toys for some people. But I'm talking about, you know, equipment that is, I don't know, about the size of a small box and has a camera attached and a GPS unit. So some pretty advanced electrical stuff, okay? And what's neat is that the concept has been proved to the point now where drones can be used for mapping applications and for remote sensing applications in particular. When I say UAS, I'm referring to a technical term called unmanned aircraft systems. And the more formal you get in this kind of discussion, the more often you're going to hear the term UAS. I'll use drone kind of interchangeably, just so that you know, okay? So drones are used for photogrammetry. And what happens is the same type of photogrammetric foundational principles that you learned in chapter 3 apply, okay? In other words, flying in straight sequential lines, or straight lines, and then parallel flight lines to them, and having forward overlap and having a side overlap, okay? The same thing applies. The difference with drones is that you have to fly with a larger amount of overlap in both directions. So in the forward position, okay, as the drone is moving forward, then you're looking at a 75%, okay, 75%. The standard parallax for traditional manned aircraft was 60%, but drones is different. You need more, okay? Now, side overlap, even more so, okay? So for side overlap, you need 70%, okay? And the reason being is that drones need more overlap because they have a lower quality sensor, right? Lower quality cameras on board. You know, the cameras are mass produced and they're not, I mean, a 4K camera for a few $100 is not the same as a, you know, $300 megapixel camera that's a few $100,000 that's equipped on a manned aircraft type of thing, right? So there's definitely a difference between the two, but in terms of application or how to apply them, it's basically the same thing. Okay, and so drones provide a lot more kind of freedom and, in a sense, kind of democratized this mapping, idea, okay, to where it becomes an everyman's kind of thing. And it's actually quite interesting and something that can be learned quickly with a very low barrier of entry. All right, that doesn't mean that it's just a simple, easy button. Don't be fooled by that kind of stuff. Certainly, I will be the one, if anybody, that would tell you you got to follow best practices. But yeah, this has opened the door a lot for kind of a renaissance or a rebirth of photogrammetry in a sense. Okay, and the thing with drone is, well, we go from conventional to this thing called multi-ray photogrammetry. Okay, so the whole stereo 3D, it still can be applied, and the same aerial triangulation is applied. Okay, again, these are things that happened in chapter 3, except with drones, we have so much more overlap. And the reason we do that is because, like I said, the lower quality sensor, but then we're able to use various software that can exploit this extra redundancy. Okay, and this extra redundancy, when we combine that with advanced software and advanced computers, we're able to automatically generate like the automatic type points, or like the, I don't think I've actually talked to you about that yet, but we're able to generate the same type of things. I will in a minute. We're able to generate the same type of things that come from a 3D stereo environment manually, okay? The same type of elevation survey, okay? But like on a scale of hundreds of thousands or millions of various points automatically. And the multi-ray terminology comes from, there are multiple, there are certainly you could say there's multiple rays or there's multiple perspectives in stereo, but now we're talking on an order of magnitude of 10 to 15 to 25 pictures overlapping each other over the same feature. Okay, so all of these things combined allow for drone photogrammetry to kind of become the new, the new hot ticket in town. All right, and how it works, this automated process, it works in a way of the first thing has to happen is the software uses machine learning, and it goes through and it looks at all the pictures. Okay, so imagine that you threw 100 pictures at a computer, a drone software, and you said drone photogrammetry software. You said, okay, process this, right? Just like as if it was 3D stereo, but process it more automatically. And so what happens is the software is going to look at the pictures, and it's going to decipher what it calls key points. And so that's what I have represented in the right image here with these orange crosses. So key points are unique colors or like type of features that the software recognizes. And then once it finds the more unique patterns it can identify, the more stamps it puts into those locations. So every key point represents a unique location. And so if you think about it, how does it actually know, going along with this discussion, how does it actually know what color is what, right? It doesn't have the eyes like us to say, oh, that's green, that's blue, that's purple, or whatever, right? So what it actually does is it looks at and it evaluates mathematically the DN values, okay? So it's looking at every pixel, thousands and thousands, actually millions of these at one time, and over and over and over again. And it's saying, oh, here's a 55. And right next to that, here's a 110. And right next to that, here's a 215, right? I mean, I'm giving examples here, right? But all of those are unique, meaning that there would be a key point and a key point and a key point. And so that's what the software is actually doing as it's in its first iteration. Okay, so next, let's talk about a couple of the important pieces, building blocks to key point creation. Features, I want you to kind of think about this from a practical sense. So features that are have a lot of variation in color, right? Because remember, I said there has to be unique patterns. So things that are heterogeneous in nature, okay? They're different from one another. They don't move, okay? Things that are like buildings or other, features on the ground that are permanent. They don't move, okay? And more flat or non-reflective type of surfaces. So all of those things combined give you the opportunity to give the software the opportunity to create a larger amount of key points. And the more key points it can create, the better the aerial triangulation is going to be. Okay, these are just some examples, like gravel and urban settings. Those are very good types of scenes when it comes to key points. The things that become challenging, this is just kind of the opposite. It's not to say impossible or you can't do this, but these will produce kind of a byproduct in photogrammetry where there won't be as many key points developed, okay? Things that are homogeneous in their color, homogeneous types of nature. So like all the examples that I have here, right? Trees are very green. They all look kind of the same, right? Water especially, and sand or ice. So things that move, because in photogrammetry, especially in this type of automated multi-array situation, the key points have to be in the same location from one image to the next, okay? They have to be in the same image, the same location from one image to the next. If it's a car here, and then it's the same car here as it was driving, then those key points aren't going to be able to link, and they're not going to be able to match, right? It's just like the 3D. It's like you're looking at a feature, and if in one picture the feature was here, and if the other picture in 3D, as you're trying to look at it in 3D, the feature moved over here, it won't actually link in 3D, okay? It won't link in stereo. So what I'm trying to get to here with all of this is what the key points do is after the key points are created, okay, the next process, automated process, is called the automatic tie points. So these are all various iterations, okay? So the automatic tie points come after the key points are generated, and the key points are then matched to neighboring key points or I should say to neighboring images, right? To generate automatic tie points. It's essentially the same key point. It's the same feature, but it's seen, okay, it's matched via the overlap in multiple images. Okay, so like, for example, like I said, here's a feature, right? Maybe it's a fire hydrant, and it's in this image. And here's so here's key point 1. Here's key point 1 again in a separate image, okay? But since they overlapped when we captured the photography, after that, the software was able to say, boom, that's going to be my permanent automatic tie point, okay? And a tie point is kind of the foundation for the aerial triangulation, all right? Think of it like the tie point. The tie points then are the building blocks for the rest of the photogrammetry. Now, not all of the key points are going to link like this, okay? Not every key point is going to turn into an automatic tie point. It's actually about a 4-to-1 ratio, okay? So sometimes key points more often than not, key points, whether the color is different between the two images, or the things move, or like I just showed some examples. And so in that case, key points that don't become automatic tie points, they essentially just get thrown out of the solution, and that's okay. All right. So how does the software know what to do after this whole key points automatic tie points thing? Well, photogrammetry aerial triangulation, it's based on the matching part is one piece, and then the second piece, okay, the next piece of aerial triangulation would be internal camera specifications. So if the software understands what the individual camera parameters are, it can then correlate the matches to something in like a 3D space and create that. And so then it knows how to scale where do the key points, or where do the automatic tie points go in relation to one another, and then everything else that's a building block after that. Okay, so 3 main things I want you to remember: the camera's focal length. Okay, that's going to help determine the altitude. The camera's XY dimensions. Okay, so like here, the XY dimensions in millimeters. We've already talked about some of this stuff already, right? determines the photo coverage, like the ground footprint, the image footprint. And then every digital camera has some type of distortion built into it, okay? So recognizing what that level of distortion is. And so there's a thing called radial distortion, and there's a thing called tangential distortion, okay? And so those two values are also part of the overall calculation to, again, determine the spacing and the scale and orientation of where the automatic tie points essentially go to build out the photogrammetry, okay? The photogrammetry bundle block, okay? Aerial triangulation, all of this stuff combined. I know I'm throwing a whole bunch of different terms at you guys, but the internal camera specifications and the tie point creation, it's all called a bundle block, okay? That's kind of the ending portion of the aerial triangulation. Aerial triangulation being the processing, then the bundle block being the results. Talking about image footprints quickly, we have just some examples. The smaller the footprint, the more images it's going to take to cover the same type of area. Okay, so that sounds pretty straightforward, but just to give you some perspective here, drones are always going to have the smallest footprints. Manned aircraft at a higher altitude is going to be a larger footprint, so larger coverage, and then satellites generally would have even larger coverage than that because now you're talking miles and miles in space. And speaking of footprints, determining those can be a key factor in understanding a project's scope. Okay, so again, looking at the graphic, what you see there in the green is the coverage on the ground. Okay, and the coverage on the ground. The higher you fly, the wider that coverage is going to be. The lower you fly, the tighter that coverage is going to be. That's called your image footprint. Okay, and so the way to determine this, we know determine the width of the footprint in the x-axis and then the y-axis, and we multiply the two things together. It's a simple kind of area thing. To determine those based on camera parameters, I have a couple formulas here for you. So I'll just leave those there. It doesn't make sense for me to kind of repeat what's already there. But you may be asked a question of that. Come back to this slide if that comes up in a quiz, okay? And let's go over just a case study for you guys, talking about image footprints and coverage. This example is a UAS, or a UAV is just another term. That's called unmanned aircraft vehicle. It's kind of annoying that they have so many of these different terms, right? Let's just, again, stick to drone as I'm talking about it. But yeah, this is the same area, Las Positas College in Livermore. And the project was to fly, so it kind of looks like that little boot. See that little red outline that I have on in the graphic? The scope was to fly this with both a manned aircraft and then with the drone and see the difference between the two things, okay? So with the manned aircraft, again, these are not to scale. They're not. I'm showing you footprints kind of examples. So with manned aircraft, you have a flight at 960 meters, which is equivalent to about 3,000 feet. And then the drone was at 100 meters. So about a 10 times difference, right? The drone being at about 300 feet, okay? And certainly they're different cameras, but I will say the thing about this is that we tried to keep it as apples to apples as possible, was that we had the same GSD in both projects, okay? And the way that was achieved was by using a very long focal length for the manned aircraft's camera. Even though it was 10 times higher, the focal length on the manned aircraft camera was an 85 millimeter focal length, okay? So it was like, it was zoomed in much closer. And it ended up resulting or yielding the same spatial resolution. So the amount of detail was negligible between the two. It was exactly the same, actually. Certainly they're different cameras, but it doesn't really matter because as long as the GSD is the same, then we can make this kind of one-to-one comparison. Okay, between the two, we have, now again, we have a larger footprint here also. So that's where things get a little bit trickier, but again, as long as the GSD, again, it's not a perfect, you know, without flaws comparison, but you know, I'm trying to just make this, we try to make this as, you know, one-to-one as possible. And so just going on these general guidelines I gave you guys, the manned aircraft was 155 image type of acquisition, where the drone was 325. So a little more than twice as much, okay? And here's an example of the flight lines, So on the left side, you have the manned versus the right side, the drone. And yeah, so I mean, a lot less effort, you could say. Again, you're talking about a manned aircraft and what's involved with that. So there's so many different trade-offs and things you have to kind of say this or that between the two things. Again, this is just to show you an example. It's not to necessarily say one is better than the other. This was meant to really be just arbitrary. Here's the site, and let's try to replicate this the same way. So, moral of this story: drone required a lot more pictures. Okay. And then another thing that we noticed that stood out quite starkly was this thing called seam lines. A seam line is the partition between two images as they are processed and in an orthophoto, okay? Orthophoto mosaic. And the mosaic would be all the pictures put together in a rectified version, but where they do come together, in some instances, well, every instance you have a seam line, but the seam lines are meant to be invisible. And so if everything is lining up correctly, you shouldn't see necessarily an artifact like this, okay? So this artifact exists, not necessarily because the seam line was bad or the processing was bad, really just a byproduct of having too small of image footprints to correct for that. And so you had various angles, and you can't adjust something that, you know, the way the picture, the way that the images, the pictures show up in the images, the features show up, excuse me, as I'm trying to sort for my words how to say this. The way that the features show up in the images is how they are. So you can't necessarily manipulate that, okay? You can mosaic them together to make it look like multiple images are one, but if there is an artifact where you have one at this angle and one at this angle, and then you combine the two, well, you end up with a seam line that is kind of obvious, okay? And this was the best you could do in this situation. Whereas with the manned aircraft, because the footprints were much larger, like in this example, the PV cells all showed up in one picture, basically. And so because they all show up in one picture, then you don't have this kind of seam line artifact, at least as obvious as it is here. Some software allow you to adjust those seam lines, but in many instances, with a drone in particular, if the seam lines can't be adjusted, the seam lines can't be adjusted any further because there's not enough coverage, okay? But yeah, okay, so, you know, this is a general, not necessarily example for this case study, kind of wrapping up, comparing the two things. And again, the reason why I'm kind of not a fan of this after I'm telling you about it now, as I'm telling you about it now, the spatial resolution, these are general statements, okay? So UAS in general is gonna be a finer spatial resolution, okay? You're gonna get more detail out of it. Because you have more freedom to literally say, I wanna fly as close as possible, right? As close as safely possible, right? Whereas with the manned aircraft, you're pretty limited to what your floor is going to be, okay? And again, in general, you would say spatial resolution, the drone is going to be a finer versus finer compared to a coarser in manned. Now, the image footprints, on the other hand, are going to be smaller, as we just saw the example, compared to the manned, it's going to be larger. The number of images to cover, the same. The number of images to get the coverage would be more for a drone, okay, as opposed to less on a manned. And then, you know, you have this factor of like on-demand available image. So basically, like I'm looking out my window and say, yeah, why don't I just go fly? I'm going to map this neighborhood right now. I could be back in half an hour with all the data right now, okay? Whereas if I try to do it with a manned aircraft, obviously that would be a much more involved undertaking, okay? Cost, again, these are some variations, right? I know this says less versus more, but I'll be honest with you, as a person that did consulting in both arenas, there is a point where you could say drone actually can cost more. And that is when it comes to deployment of manned resources on the ground, because somebody has to be, and actually as per regulations, there's supposed to be two people overseeing a drone flight. So that means two people in the field sucking up hours, which means that could cost more money. Whereas with the manned aircraft, if it's a larger area, there is a point where the returns kind of become diminishing in a sense, where it's like, hey, if I could do 100 acres, I might as well be able to do 500 acres for, you know, a few $100 more. As opposed to the drone, that would be, you know, 100 acres is going to be what it is, right? You're always going to need more manpower to get that done. So again, that's kind of a variable one, and the same thing is, I could make the same exact argument for the same when it comes to how much time it takes to collect and how much time it takes to process. Ultimately, the more imagery you have, the more money it's going to cost, and the more time it's going to be, and the more time it's going to process. Okay, the more time it's going to take to process. So those are trade-offs between the two. Again, not to say one is better than the other. I might ask you a question though. You know, outline the pros and cons of one of these things. Okay, so think about that. And that's going to be all I have for this one. Sorry for the abrupt change. We had some technical issues there with the original video, but I hope that this makes up for that now. Okay, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye for now, everybody.